From last week's episode, it seems that the content in the Sermon on the Mount are these four aspects of Christ's teaching. Blessed are those pure in heart, are merciful, make peace, and seek righteousness. These have become the tenets of democratic and just societies. What do you think about that? That's from Fred. And is that one of the ways that Christianity has impacted the world?
Yes, it certainly has been. You know, the definition of love prior to the time of Christ was kind of a very influx idea. So if you read Plato, for example, you get everything on the notion of love from, you know, real loyalty that he might have to Socrates, to the romantic love of Eros, and a variety of different things. But they're all kind of, you know, congealed, you know. And if you look at the Old Testament view of love prior to Jesus, there's definitely a generative view of love, but it is really Jesus who crystallizes it, focuses on it, and the Beatitudes are the definition of love that Jesus gives us. So essentially, he's taken 4 out of the 6 defining Beatitudes, but the questioner, but you know, the first one, you know, the poor in spirit, that can never be neglected, because that really means humble-hearted. And the fact that that's at the top of the list is extremely important. Humility, humble-heartedness, that's the beginning point of love, that I can displace my ego, even if it's only for 2 seconds, and that's about my limit. But I mean, the main thing is that people see, you know, that they're, you know, something about somebody else that's worth sacrificing for, just because of who they are in themselves. That fundamental act of humility. And then that word meek, which in this culture, that's really easy to skip over, because it might even sound like a milquetoast or something. But it really means gentle-heartedness. And gentle-heartedness, that's that virtue where, you know, of patience and tolerance for people in their weakness. And without this, of course, we have a very, very difficult you know, time continuing a relationship with anybody, let alone, you know, somebody we don't know very well. So that idea of being just gentle at heart is really important. And then all of the other ones mentioned by the questioner, you know, that is correct. So definitely we want to be zealous for souls. We want to be merciful, mercy meaning forgiving and compassionate. We want to be people who are pure in heart, and people, you know, who are peacemakers and are looking for peace. So the key thing, that definition, when you put it in the context of 2 other things that Jesus said, right? The first thing is, you know, that love is the highest commandment. And of course, now we see that definition of love, now you put it in as the highest commandment, and all other virtues must serve that definition of love. Once you have that, you're now in a position where you are truly changing the world. Then Jesus goes on to define God in terms of that love. And then finally, Jesus goes on to say, you know, that He is the reflection. He is present to every human being, such that whatever we do to another human being, you do unto him. When you put that foursome together, this is going to be a philosophy that changes the world. But it changes the world not just because Jesus put it out there, right? You can put a lot of things out there, and as we know today, there are a gazillion competitive ideas out there. But what happened was the Christian church acted on it, and the power of the Holy Spirit was with the Christian church. And that double combination of the Christian church acting on it and also the Spirit powerfully manifesting itself, not just in miracles and the great things that the apostles were doing in the early church, but also in the interior conversion that was taking place in the early church community. That combination begins, right, to start transforming everything. And of course, when it starts transforming everything, look at what begins to happen, as we talked about last week, right? First thing that happens is the Christians start this huge public health network, which becomes, of course, the largest public health network internationally in the world, and that's the Catholic Church. But it started way back then, and what happened was, of course, they started treating the slaves, treating people who couldn't get health care, and then they started educating, same thing, public education, way beyond the Christian community, right? They were educating these people, giving them a way out of their destitution, and of course, the minute they did that, again, it was undermining slavery, and eventually, right, it even undermines the cruelty. People are criticizing, you know, the cruelties of Rome with real articulation and power and skill through the teachings of Jesus. Finally, of course, they start this great public welfare system in the same way, where the generosity of the Christian community is well known. And as we said last week, the public health system, the public education system, and the public welfare system, the three largest of these systems internationally in the world, is still the Catholic Church, bar none, way ahead of any other international organization. But that's the tip of the iceberg, because Jesus' teaching did not stop there. It gets into the mind of St. Paul, who comes up with the notion of conscience, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. It gets into the mind of St. Augustine, who begins to really refine this, right? Through the power of the Spirit, through his own commitment and education, this brilliant St. Augustine comes up with these adages, right? An unjust law is no law at all. So Augustine it was who put justice above the positive law. Positive law means a law that's passed by a legislature, a law that's passed by a court, or is adjudicated by a court, etc. So the key thing then is we've got this priority of the principle of justice over the positive law, such that an unjust law absolutely mitigates the law itself, its force, its power, its authority, its authenticity, and its legitimacy. That's Augustine. Then you get to the second part of this, and you've got Augustine proclaiming, right, that the end doesn't justify the means. Well, the minute you get that truth out of the bag, you can't just go for a good end without looking at the means. You just can't go for a loving end, but use means that are unloving to get to the loving end. You can't get to a good end by using an evil means. And Augustine makes all of these nuances, right? The principle of double effect, the lesser of two evils, right? And he's got these various things that even allow him to make a just war theory. This is the tip of the iceberg. He continues. He also goes into three other areas that are very important, but I'm just going to skip some history here. Go into the idea of natural law with St. Thomas Aquinas. This goes back to Jesus' teaching, right? Whatsoever you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. But Jesus did one other thing that was really important, that gives rise to the natural law and to what we're later going to see is in the inalienable rights theory. And that is, Jesus discovered the golden rule. Prior to Jesus, there really is no articulation of the golden rule, but only the silver rule. Remember that the silver rule is the one with the knots. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Right? Don't do a harm to others you don't want done to you. Avoid an unnecessary harm, but if a harm is unavoidable, minimize it. That's what we call ethical minimalism. And that's part of the silver rule, right? The principle of non-maleficence, part of every religion and every culture that there is. It's part of the natural law. It's just sewn into our conscience, into our being. Now there's the golden rule, which goes beyond, because when Jesus takes the knots out of there, and he's the first to do it in history. I have looked for any other example of this, and I have failed to find it in any writings of any religion, period. But Jesus puts, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do the good for others that you would want done to you. So the sky's the limit at this juncture, right? You know, and of course, here we now see the condition for improving society, improving the common good, looking to a future that's better than this one. The principle of love. Jesus ingeniously integrates the principle of love right into the former fundamental principle of minimalistic ethics and justice by simply removing those knots. Do the good for others that you would want done to you. That's more than ethical minimalism, right? I can avoid doing harms, but the goods that I can do for you are far greater than the harms I can avoid doing to you. And so, of course, the minute you do that, you now have a culture that is going to move ahead, not only in ethics, in justice, but in love and compassion and peace and all of the other Beatitudes we just talked about. I mean, Jesus has set the world on fire. Now, and there's no turning back.
Right, there's no turning back, but the question today may be that, sitting there today in the 21st century saying, well, it was nice that there was this bridge. You know, we had these various bridges over history, Judaism and different religious bridges, and Christianity brought us to this point, and now we're moving beyond it. Now we really don't need all of that because we've kind of accepted that, and we're more intelligent, we're more evolved, so those stories we don't need. Yeah. But the tenets are good, and we'll keep those going. Why isn't that a proper attitude for people to have, and is that what you're seeing today?
I'm seeing plenty of people who are making these claims that they're moving beyond Christianity. But of course, any objective viewer can take a look at what's going on and saying, really? You're going to move beyond the humble-heartedness, the gentle-heartedness? You're going to move beyond the peace. You're going to move beyond all these things that Jesus is talking about by the doctrine that you have replaced it with. What doctrine would that be? That it's okay to kill children just because they happen to be in utero? What doctrine is that? The doctrine that it's okay to kill people simply because they've gotten to an age that seems like, they should kind of move out of, the domain of our economic purview. What kind of doctrine is that? The doctrine that permits suicide and calls suicide a positive end to life? Well, what kind of doctrine is that? The doctrine that dictates that there are certain classes of people who have more of a right to live than other classes of people that do not? What kind of a doctrine is that that's supposed to replace Christianity, which is so filled with elitism that it literally sickens the stomach when you take a look at these people who are pretending to literally cloak themselves in the compassion of Christ, but underneath are filled with an elitism that is absolutely desirous of straining out the inferiors from society, dripping with disdain. I mean, this is such an illusion. You gotta say that even the people who propose the new ethic beyond the great Christian love of Jesus, that these people are so deluded themselves, they're in a world of decadence and darkness that was fashioned for them by the evil spirit, and they don't even know they're in it. It is literally an ignorance, and it is literally a darkness that is doubled back upon themselves, and they're now making these extraordinary claims that lead people into the darkness as they wave the little flag of the new light they have discovered beyond Christ. And I have to tell you, it is so illusory, so delusional, so self-obsessed, so elitist, and so wrong. I mean, somebody has got to do some kind of an authentication check, an authenticity check. Do I really believe what I'm saying? Do I really think, do I have the right to be proclaiming a new ethic beyond that of Christ? Who do I think I am? Do I really have the authenticity, the inner spiritual conviction the true spiritual freedom to be truly humble-hearted, truly pure of heart, truly gentle-hearted, truly compassionate, truly forgiven? I don't think so. Better look hard. Self-examination is always the most important thing when you think you have a replacement for the loving doctrine of Christ and His Holy Spirit.
Right.
You better look twice, because you may be so far into the darkness yourself, it'll be hard for you to get out of it, let alone lead anybody else out of it.
Right. Well,
I got on my soapbox here. But,
I was going to say that you need to get a little more emotional on some of these topics, Father, because to show us how strongly you feel about it.